Hello, my name is Aleksandre Asatiani. I'm an associate professor in information systems at the Department of Applied IT at the University of Gothenburg. And today I would like to talk to you about remote work. Specifically, in this lecture, I want to go through the concept of remote work to help us try to understand what remote work really is. Remote work is one of those things which we think we know what it is when we see it. However, it might be difficult to clearly pin down what it is about. And if we don't understand what remote work is about, then we won't be able to actually properly analyze it and properly act on it when we need it in practice. So let's start with a little bit with some background about remote work. So during the coronavirus in 2020-2022, when the restrictions were at its highest, there was a lot of buzz about remote work. At first we thought that remote work would continue maybe just for a couple of months. But then, as pandemic went on and on and on, remote work has become a part of the normal working life for many people. And then we started to speculate what will be in the future. So as a result of this, we got sort of a remote work revolution. All of a sudden, remote work was everywhere. It was realistic for many people to work remotely. And what's more, we started to see that actually a lot of jobs that seemed to be impossible before, all of a sudden were viable. So people started to grow appetite for work remotely. And we had some data to back up the optimistic outlook on the remote work. It wasn't just that we felt that it was good and it was working. The data also confirmed that. So in this study that was done in 2020 by University of Southampton, together with some partners, they have discovered that majority of the people seemed to be at least as productive as they were before the pandemic has started, and many of them actually felt that they were getting more things done than before in the office. And in contrast, very few people actually felt that remote work did not offer them advantages or made their life worse. And what's more, a great majority of the people, more than 60%, has preferred to continue working after the pandemic was over. And very few people actually wanted to fully go back to office and stop working remotely at all. So that's a success story. But we need to remember that remote work actually is not something that appeared just a couple of years ago due to the pandemic. Remote work was something that we have been having the visions about and ideas about already for 100 years. As you can see here, this is some pictures from an old magazine about radio from 1925. And already then, where people just had radios and very rudimentary television technology, they already dreamed of remote work. In this case, doctor examining their patients remotely. A telemedicine, something that we are starting to get used today. But if during that time this was more of a fantasy and it was not as realistic, and what's more, people hoped that technology will develop a lot faster than it did in fact. But as time went on, these dreams started to slowly flesh out. This is the picture already from a magazine from 1950s, end of 1950s in fact. And what do we see here? Well, the technology might be looking slightly different these days, but this is essentially a Zoom meeting. This is the job interview done with Zoom, where the candidate is in US and the employer is in Argentina. That sounds very familiar today. And then already in 1960s, we were starting to get close to this dream. But we still were not there yet. However, the reality of the remote work was not that far away from us. And already in 1970s, people actually started to finally fulfill the dream of work remotely. This man on the picture here, Jack Niles, a self-proclaimed rocket scientist, was head of the project that was tackling specifically remote work, the emerging phenomena of remote work in 1975. So he, with the background of somebody who worked with the satellites, switched from studying more of a technology to studying the phenomena that he was seeing all around him. And he said that there are 3 signs of why remote work is coming now and why it is finally real. First, he said that there is emerging information industry. So if 100 years ago, in 1920s, there were only few privileged people who actually could work in so-called information industry, knowledge work, what we would call today, growingly this privilege has been spread to other people, and more people were involved now in the knowledge work, and less people were involved in things like manufacturing and farming. And that helped remote work immensely. Second factor was relatively low-cost computers. So computers are sort of an important part for remote work. In order to enable us to communicate on a long distance, we need some sort of a technology. And such technology was prohibitively expensive for all these decades before 1970s. But 1970s was the time when a lot of the personal computing revolution was happening and was about to happen. So computers, while still expensive, while still unaffordable for most of the people, started to be more reality, especially in the corporate setting. And the third was what Jack Niles called increasing forces of decentralization. And here he was talking that we are more and more are willing to actually have organizations that are decentralized. If in olden days, organizations mostly were operating from a single office or some distributed branches and headquarters, now all of a sudden we were more willing to have global companies that were multinational, multicultural, and where the work processes were spread out all around the world. So these 3 components started to make remote work more viable, and people indeed engaged in such work. But what is remote work? Is this just about working from a different location using your computer? Or is there something more to it? Well, a very simplistic definition that would satisfy most of the layperson who doesn't need to think about remote work all that much would be that remote work is when people work from a geographic location that is not their primary workplace. And this is, as I said, good enough. But that does not really tell us much about how this construct actually works and what does it mean in practice, apart from being away from your office. So this definition is not very meaningful in the world. So this definition is not very meaningful in the world with the increasingly complex work arrangements. So then the scientists and practitioners started to gradually think more and more what remote work really is and how we should analyze it. And at first we had a sort of a black and white dichotomic view. You either are a remote worker, somebody who works from a remote location, perhaps your home, and then we have a non-remote workers who are just in the office all the time. And that dichotomy worked in the beginning. In 1970s, when Jack Niles was just about starting the research about remote work, there was only very few people who could actually afford it, or for whom it was viable due to their working conditions. And it was easy to say, some people work remotely and some people work from office. But that started to be an insufficient definition, because we started to get the people who sort of did both. Partially, they were working at home, partially, they were working remote. So then, maybe we thought that it is a continuum. So we have people who are fully face-to-face, working always in the office day in, day out. And then we have some people who are fully remote, never even come to the office, maybe don't even have an office. But in the middle there, we have this big chunk of people where it's complicated. They're hybrid. Sometimes they come to work, sometimes they don't. And there is a great variety of such people. Some people maybe come 4 times a day. Some people come perhaps 4 times a week to workplace. Some other people maybe come once in a couple of weeks. And those two types of people are not really the same. So for a while we sort of rolled with the continuum that maybe if we can measure, if we can say that, oh, somebody works a particular percentage of time from home, that will mean something. But even then that started to be insufficient, because even this percentage of time we spent in the office does not tell us all that much. It tells us something, definitely, but we cannot fully analyze what remote work is. So then we started to go into a more sophisticated views of what remote work is about. So then we started to think actually about, rather than thinking how much people spend at work or at home or where they are, we needed to think what actually is the problem with working remotely actually. What is it that makes it different? Does it really matter where people work? And if it does, how so? What is the problem? To tackle this, some researchers came up with this vision of discontinuities and continuities. So they said, well, you don't need to think about where people are. Think about what are people able to do and not able to do when they are working remotely. And if they are not able to do something, is there anything that we can do to enable them to do this? So maybe then we can make those differences between home and office work disappear. And they compared this these barriers that you face working remotely, they compared those to the country borders. So they were saying that, okay, imagine an example that you are driving a truck, you're a truck driver. And if you're driving it from point A to point B, and you're within the same country, say Canada, you get into your truck, you start driving, you pull your GPS map, you go to the destination and drive without any problems, provided there are no accidents happening. And then you will arrive to the point B, you drop your cargo, and then you can go your way. But now imagine you're the same truck driver, driving the same cargo and same truck in Canada. But now you need to drive same distance that you had for B, but now you're driving to the city C. But this city is in the United States of America. And all of a sudden, the task becomes slightly more challenging. You get into your truck, you're starting to drive on the roads not that different than the roads that were leading you to point B. But in between there, you have a state border where border control, they want to check your documents, they might want to see your cargo, so that slows you down. A discontinuity is appearing in this process. And this discontinuity causes you an additional cost, which is the time that you have to wait on the border to go through all the checks. So they were saying that the remote work is similar like that. You're doing something in your office, and it goes smoothly. There are no problems. But then you're trying to do the same task from home, and even though it's the same task, and you have the same computer, and very often the same software that you use to do this work, something might happen that stops you from doing this work as well as you would have done from the office. Maybe you have some internet problems and you cannot get into your network of your company. Maybe you need to ask somebody a question, and this colleague usually sits next to you, and you can ask them normally in the office, but now all of a sudden they are not around and you don't know what to do. So some problems might appear. And they say that that's like driving the truck across the border. You're doing the same thing, but there are slight barriers there. So what they propose to think about is that to look at those problems, look at those boundaries and discontinuities that these boundaries cause, and try to resolve them. And the resolution for this would be what they called continuities, building some sort of mechanisms that will help these continuities to minimize or completely disappear. And as an example of the continuity, the authors give a same example of a truck driver. Because imagine, now we have the same truck driver driving the same truck and same cargo, but this time the truck driver is in Europe, and say they're in Belgium. So whether they need to drive a cargo within the Belgium or whether they need to drive this same truck to Netherlands is really the same, because within the European Union there are no state border controls. This same truck driver could ride to Netherlands, to Germany, to Denmark, to France, and see no resistance and no barriers whatsoever. Why is that? Well, because European Union built a continuity. And that continuity is freedom of movement of goods and people across the borders. So we have a border, but we do not have this continuity. So the authors argue that in remote work, to really understand it, we should really break it down to the problems, and then we should try to solve those problems by building these continuities. Somebody has problems with the internet, that they cannot work properly when they do work from home? Well, maybe company can pay and make sure that these people have a proper internet in their homes. Then this discontinuity disappears. And if, in theory, we can make all or most of the discontinuities disappear, or at least minimize, we can minimize cost of working from home. And then, whether we work remotely or from home does not make all that much difference. Of course, that's not viable in every case. Same if we go back to the doctors. Yes, doctors can do telemedicine these days and consult you through your mobile phone. But if doctor still needs to operate you, then they will kind of need to show up at the hospital. So that's kind of a discontinuity that you cannot overcome. Your doctor cannot operate you through their computer or through their phone. But we can definitely minimize those things. And that's the key then to the remote work. It's not about where somebody is working, but it is about what sort of problems, discontinuities it creates, and how to solve them. If we figure this out, the issue of where people are becomes not that big. I hope this was helpful to get to a basic idea and to introduce ourselves to what remote work really is. So as a conclusion, think about the problems and how to solve them when working remotely. Don't think about remote work and how much people work. That will give you a better picture of what it is about. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next lecture.